So what we're going to do is we're going to start refining the arm. So I found this picture here of this kind of backhoe, and I'm just going to kind of edit the background off and use it for just some of its design elements. Again, just kind of cleaning it up and positioning it to kind of get it into the right space and the right perspective. So I'm just using the different warp tools and perspective tools just to get it to approximately fit. It doesn't need to be perfect, but what I'm really looking for is just a consistent kind of look overall. So I'm just going to kind of position it and kind of warp it to make it look good. And I'm going to duplicate it here and erase away some of the elements just to give it a little bit more thickness. I'm not really interested in shovel hands either, so I'll just get rid of those and make it so it looks like there's just a kind of connector. I'm also going to do the curve and the saturation actions on it just to get it back down to the baseline. And now what I'm doing is I'm just painting out details and information I don't need. I didn't really like the way that the original kind of wire coming off that hydraulic was looking, so I'm just going to paint it in the way I want it to look. And again, I'm just kind of cleaning out pieces I don't need and pieces I do need. So I'm going to duplicate it to the other side. First of all, I'll take away the white background on the back of the mech, and I'm actually just going to erase away this arm I don't need anymore, since we're making these new arms. So it actually just lives behind his chest now, and I'm also going to just warp it for some perspective to make it a little more interesting and feel like it's kind of curving around his body. So just placing the lower arm, mocking in maybe some of these fingers, kind of how his hand works. And I found this other backhoe. I'm just going to grab the whole shape. I'm not sure what I want to use with it yet. So I'm just going to kind of look around and see if there's any particular part or piece I can use. So I kind of like the way this top piece looked here. So just going to kind of erase away. Get rid of the background noise and information. And clean it up. There's just a lot of extra stuff that I really want. But this saves me a ton of time and lets me kind of play with shapes, and it takes away a lot of the hard work that I might have to spend just to get it in there. So again, we'll take the curves down, we'll take down the saturation, and then I'll brighten it back up just to get it to fit with everything else kind of in the picture. Use the warp again just to get it feeling a little more like it's a part of the overall mech. Just before it wasn't really feeling like it was fitting. So I'm just going to kind of size it and move it and then fill in the colors where appropriate. So I'm fixing the lighting information a little bit too, because it wasn't actually lit from this way. I kind of have to come over and repaint over a lot of the panels to get it to feel like it's properly lit. So we have that top down from the right lighting. Also, painting over a lot of this Photoshop stuff, you can see the image is pretty grainy at times. When I just do a simple overpaint, what happens is now I have the ability to kind of clean up the image and have a consistent feeling on the surface. Because I'll come back in later if we want to add texture and add it in. But for now, I really don't want to see that graininess in the image that makes it feel like a photo. So again, I'm just refining my edges, kind of cleaning things up as I go. Adding little highlights, edges, shadowing, and darkening some stuff. I didn't really like that little kind of nick in his arm. I wanted to make it a little more organic. So just painting out some of that stuff. And again, adding in our shadows and highlights, which are super important to make it feel like panels are on top or below each other. All that other information I didn't really need up there, so just kind of erased it out. I liked the one circle and hole, but the rest of it just kind of was a little bit too much noise. It was taking too much of my attention. I'm really interested in that. So again, I'm adding highlights to the edges of these panels just to make them feel like they have some depth. And then also just kind of come back in here, refine it, add a little bit of a shadow kind of happening from this overlap. Important to make it feel like it's really kind of connected inside of his arm. Coming back in here, and all I'm doing is still just painting in some of that lighting information, cleaning up where I can, get rid of some of the noise from the image originally, but taking the photo references and using it as a base and actually just coming back in here and refining the lighting information is super important to a really good composition to make it feel like it's consistent. So even though we're using some photos, really we're still touching all of it to get it to work. We're just using it to kind of help us kind of inform some design and some form. So just cleaning up the edge, pushing and pulling some things, seeing if there's any interesting pieces I can find. Always good at no matter what stage you're at, just kind of pushing the form, exploring, and testing. Cleaning out this panel, just getting rid of some of the noise. It's a little too noisy, called for too much attention. Just want to pull it back a little bit. and clean up some of this stuff. Again, just working on highlights and shadows. Really kind of push the form in and out. So cleaned up the back of that round of that shadow. We still had that silhouette in there from our thumbnail. At this point now, what I'm really doing is I'm getting rid of it as I go. I don't need all of that, and it's going to just get in the way, and now I can actually see exactly what I'm working with. So I needed a little piece that connected the torso to the arm. So I just kind of painted it in, and what I'm doing here is I'm painting in the idea that it's be dark in there underneath the arm. The arm is actually casting a shadow on the body, so it helps kind of recede. And all I did was use just a big soft airbrush just to kind of paint in there. And what I'm doing here is I'm just using an overlay, which will only pick up the information on painted objects to kind of get in there. So cleaning up these little shoulder pieces, kind of make it feel a little better. Feel like it's more integrated over the arm. Super important. Get all these pieces that actually work together. And I'm adding a little bit of a highlight to the little piece of kind of rubber, just to make it feel a little bit more concise. Playing around with how tall it should be, if it should be tall or short. Kind of cleaning it up. It was getting a little rough and a little loose, so adding back in, I was kind of just using it as a guide more at this point than anything. And you see almost none of the original information from that kind of flap is there. I'm just using it to kind of inform a shape and design. Something I may not have thought of right off the top of my head. So I found this little claw thing here that was really interesting. Maybe he's got these little graspers. He's like a little mechanical robot and needs to be able to grip onto stuff. So I saturated it and used the curves and stuff. Now I'm just warping the perspective tools to kind of get an approximate look. I figured that these kind of coils in his hand can rotate and do different things. So I'm not looking for anything perfect, but the idea that maybe it can come in there and it can rotate on different axes of 360 degrees lets me kind of see it. And from this angle, it just looks the most impressive. So I'm going to just get in here and I'm going to start fixing the lighting information on it. So I'm just painting in the color of what the surface should look like if it was being hit by 100% light. So I'm just taking out the lighting information that was there on the surfaces, and I'm editing it to be the proper lighting information. So I really didn't like all that detailed stuff in the center, so I just painted over it. We don't need it anymore. It really wasn't working for the design, so I just took it out. And I wasn't sure if I was going to keep these bolts in, so what I did was I just kind of paint over them lightly, like 50% opacity. And what happens when you do that, it just takes the attention away from them. So you still get the benefit of some detail, but you don't get the focus that the eye kind of demands of it. So it kind of pushes it to the background, which is pretty useful. So again, we're just continuously painting in, refining our paint over by adding in the proper lighting information. And we're just think about it the easiest way is that you have 3 different colors to work with. You've got lights, mediums, and darks. And if at this point we just kind of keep those consistent, we can kind of figure out what is underneath the other surfaces, what's exposed to light, what isn't. And that'll really help kind of inform the design, pushing and pulling things. Here I kind of simplified some of these gear forms. They just were a little bit too noisy and too high frequency. So what was happening is they were drawing for too much attention, where really I'd rather see your attention more on the ends of the hands. And those as well were like made of foam, something soft, and they just weren't really reading well. They were too high frequency. So just painting over them and doling them out a little bit can really help. So here I painted the highlight in a different layer, and I'm actually just erasing away to kind of get a little bit of a nice bevel that's a little softer. And here I didn't really like the way that cylinder was bent. I like that the arm feels a little more organic, a little more kind of a bend in the middle, but a hydraulic tube really wouldn't have that bend in it. So it just feels important to kind of come in and edit it. And here I'm using the smudge tool again to just add some more interest. You know, we don't need to have 100% straight lines everywhere. It's nice to kind of have these little kick-in panels and little different design elements. So really kind of change things up and make it feel different. Again, just painting in more shadows and inform what can happen inside the model itself here. was a little too dark for me, so just kind of painting over it and kind of matching that proper color. Not forgetting to add our shadows and our highlighted edges. So I actually keep toggling on and off that I have the shadow for the arm on a different layer, so that way I can turn it off and get the right amount of paint color information, so I don't confuse myself. But then when I turn it back on, then I can actually see what it looks like in shadow. So again, just refining these shapes. Now I'm starting to play with maybe some little design elements, just something to kind of bring some interest there, but it doesn't like demand a ton of my attention. And I'll just paint these down just so they kind of fade away. Wasn't super happy with the design, so I want to just test a couple different things, and this is totally fine just to see like what works, what doesn't. Sometimes we can use even the smudge tool just to kind of push and pull things. Wasn't really happy with the way it was looking, so I'm just going to test a couple different designs. Changing like the size of them is also important. So sometimes elements that are a little smaller, a little bigger, can just work out nicely. So using conjunction of different sizes. Other times it might actually affect it and make it look worse. So we want to try to avoid it. But for now, just being able to test some of your different design ideas isn't a bad idea. I do try to stay away from too many big ideas too early on. But here again, we took that square handle and I added some little chunks into it and give it a little bit more of a design that is a little more appropriate. So what's happening here is I'm just adding like on a different layer, a nice big soft shadow, and I'm just erasing away the parts I don't want to make it feel like the arm is casting a shadow down onto the hand. And now I'm just refining this, making sure my colors are right. It was a little too light before for me. And I'm just trying to figure out what this shape really is actually. Just trying to figure out how it would be put together and what its purpose is mechanically. So adding in my highlights, adding in a little bit more information. So maybe there's like this kind of beam that's connected to the top here. They're all connected together. There's one at the bottom. Maybe this actuates like the different fingers or the way the claw works. Just testing different things. It was a little muddy, so what I did was I just decided to like kind of bring them all together and just paint out what was there, just make it into a single beam by masking it off and using a big soft brush. So now what I've done is I've kind of cleaned up my form. I've got it all consistent again. I've got something better to work with. So kind of had this shape off to the side of the hand here and decided to maybe integrate it a little bit more because it was just kind of floating there doing nothing. So maybe that runs into the front of that other piece. Kind of supports the movement and lets it rotate. So I like the way that first cylinder came out, so I just mask it again, put down a base color, and then big soft brush back and forth, make it kind of a shadow, and then do a little bit of a highlight on top. That'll give me a nice little like kind of cylinder shape to work with. And then I come back in here, put a little bit of ambient occlusion, experimenting with like some little joining pieces. So you should always think about just how these pieces are connecting. You know, are they welded together? Is there a little piece of just any material, how they kind of like press together? Are they machined together? Are they bolted together later? All things that are super important just to think about when you're drawing and painting. Can really give it a lot of realism and help sell the overall composition. So I wasn't super sold with it, so I thought maybe I'd put like this flap over that section, paint it in. More like this is like a little panel that those pieces would still be underneath, but kind of protect it. And I'm doing this on a different layer just to kind of to test and see what I can get away with. So adding in some shadow helped define my form. I even only have just two colors there. I can really do a lot. And kind of like encasing the front of it in a little bit more of a scoop. So the design was a little bit just too intense before and was calling for too much attention. And it really didn't feel very practical in the sense of the rest of the design. So I kind of just simplified it down into this. And we should really never be afraid of that. You know, if it really isn't working or the shape just isn't reading right, like don't be afraid to dramatically change it. Because you'd be surprised sometimes what you just end up making it can be pretty cool. So again, I'm just testing some different like little design elements on it. So instead of having that big open thing, maybe it's like vented to like let the information through. Or maybe it's ported like that so that it's not so heavy. And it also gives us a nice little point of interest lower on the hand. It kind of leads down into the claw. So little highlights. Again, painting back in our darks and our lights after we've kind of decided what form works. And then I had this little gap here, so I just wanted to add some information just to kind of fill it in. It's a little more consistent. So in here you can see just kind of working on adding in some highlights and trying to figure out what this pipe actually is going to be here. So some little more highlights, a little more touching, and just checking how it's working. So my shadow from before wasn't big enough now to incorporate my new design, so I'm just kind of adding to my overlay shadow, which is on a different layer. And here what I'm doing, I'm just kind of organizing the arm into different groups, just so I can move the whole arm. So I just grabbed all the layers that my arm was made out of, and I just moved it over. So now that we have our arms in a good spot, what we're going to do is we'll just go on to the next video and we'll start refining the lower torso.